Many, if not most of you know Heather. Heather is the person really in charge of sort of the science and policy at TURA. She manages the data. She really dives in deep to the implications of listing certain chemicals as part of her role as managing the Science Advisory Board for the TURA program. So Heather has put together a really good webinar that's going to give you some background information and guidance on what you need to know around reporting. Heather, take it away.
Okay, welcome everyone this afternoon, and I want to acknowledge all the TURA partners that contributed to this presentation to make it the best possible one we can for you guys. So today we will be talking about what you need to know for reporting of the TURA Certain PFAS NOL category for this first reporting year. As an overview of our session today, we're going to review the TURA and TRI PFAS. We're going to review the guidance document for reporting the TURA PFAS, expected uses in Massachusetts, as we've identified, as we've been talking about PFAS for the last several years, what DEP expectations are for the first filing year, and best practices for you all to follow. So this first table has PFAS tracking and reporting under TRI and TURA. And today we are mostly focused on reporting of the TURA Certain PFAS NOL category. Those are only reportable under TURA. Tracking started January 1st of 2022, and first reports are due to DEP July 1st, 2023. Those are reportable as a category under typical TURA thresholds of 25,000 pounds manufactured or processed and 10,000 pounds otherwise used. There are other things to be aware of with PFAS reporting, and namely that is what's going on with TRI. TRI added 172 PFAS through the National Defense Authorization Act in 2020. And you can see the reporting dates for those 172 here. And they have continued to add in 2021, 2022, and 2023. And what we've learned is it's best to keep checking back because they're constantly adding. Those TRI PFAS are reportable individually. There's a reporting threshold of 100 pounds for them. And TURA by statute shall adopt those changes. So we do adopt those PFAS. They do become individually reportable under TURA at 100 pounds. However, there has to be an administrative council vote and a reg package that goes out. So typically TURA is delayed a year or more for that to happen. So there is some flux between when something happens on TRI and when it's adopted under TURA. And we've kind of listed that out in the tables that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So the TURA Certain PFAS NOL category is first reportable for the 2022 reporting year. And those are the reports that are due July 1st of 2023. And we've got a definition here that is those PFAS that contain a perfluoroalkyl moiety with 3 or more carbons, and we've got an example to the right there, and a perfluoroalkyl ether moiety with 2 or more carbons, and a Gen X example there. So the dash is not a bond to hydrogen. There can be straight or branch structures, and what belongs in the category are PFAS that are not otherwise listed, NOL. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute too. So once we came up with that definition, we tried to develop a reporting guidance for you that covered all the PFAS that are known to be in commerce. So we generated a list of PFAS that's known to be in commerce in the US. It's primarily taken from the Toxic Substances Control Act, Chemical Data Reporting System. And theoretically, those are all PFAS that are known to be in commerce in the US. We also used information from OECD, the Organization for Economic and Cooperation Development. They had done a lot of work categorizing PFAS, PFAS that are important in other countries and that sort of thing. So we used some of their information. While we were doing that work, we saw a few papers that showed PFAS found in US water supplies. So if something was found in a water supply in the US, we added it to our list of stuff we know that's being used in the US. So we have a pretty good representation of what PFAS are used in the US. However, the list, because of the nature of the definition and because PFAS can be developed all the time, the lists are not exhaustive. We also do want to note that a third of the PFAS on the TSCA CDR don't have cast numbers or names. So those are the ones that make it really hard. So in the guidance document, which I think Pam is going to add to the chat, there's several tables breaking out the PFAS that are reportable to TURA in different ways. So the first table lists PFAS that are individually reportable under TURA at the 100-pound threshold after TURA has adopted the TRI and DAA listings. So using the guidance document this year, if a PFAS is on this list, you have to report it at 100 pounds to TURA. That's the first 172. Table 2 identifies a very small group of PFAS that were actually already on the TURA list. They weren't on the TURA list because they're PFAS, but because of some historic addition to the list, maybe they were under TRI or CERCLA, 30 years ago, they were already on the TURA list. And so those PFAS are reportable individually. They've been on the list since the get-go, or at least 1993. If you're using them, you probably already know it, but you would continue to report those individually under normal thresholds. And that's table 2 in its entirety. Table 3 shows some overlap between the somewhat recently added TURA C1 to C4 halogenated hydrocarbons category. So this category was added to TURA around 2018. If you're using chemicals in this category, you hopefully already know it, and reporting those individually already. So you would continue to report them individually. The substances that are here in white that are not highlighted are ones that technically meet a PFAS definition, but they don't meet our PFAS definition, which is a whole nother thing. But the ones that are here that are not highlighted, you continue to report those under the TURA C1 to C4 halogenated hydrocarbons category. And again, hopefully, if you're using one of those chemicals, you're already reporting it. So you keep doing the same thing. The ones that are the 5 that are highlighted in gray at the bottom of this table meet the TURA PFAS NOL definition, and they're also TURA C1 to C4 halogenated hydrocarbons. So for those 5, you report both categories. You do only have to pay one fee, and there's instructions later in the presentation about that. And this is kind of meat of what's new here, are a list of PFAS that are reportable as part of the certain PFAS NOL category. So this table 4 is very, very long. There's a lot more than what you see here. There are maybe 300 or 400 PFAS that we identified through the TSCA CDR, grabbed a chemical structure for them and checked whether they belong in the category or not. They are ordered by cast number from smallest to largest. So you can look through those there and determine whether you are using a PFAS that does need to be reported as part of the certain PFAS NOL category. The PFAS that are highlighted in gray at the end of table 4 are those chemicals that I talked about that are in flux. They have been added to TRI as of the date at the end of their chemical name. But remember that lag that I was talking about earlier. There's a lag from when they were added to TRI to when they'll get adopted under TURA. So for this reporting year, you report them as part of the category, and then check back next year and we'll update the table every year as to how things have been added to TURA through the process. The last 2 pages of the reporting guidance have some example PFAS, examples of PFAS that are included in the TURA Certain PFAS NOL category, and some that aren't. So this slide that's highlighted, that's outlined in green are ones that are included. We see a lot of straight chain PFAS here, some cyclic ones. HFE is in the middle, so HFEs are definitely included in the category. And then down at the bottom here, we have some examples of polymers that are included in the category. This slide that's outlined in red have some examples of PFAS that are not included in the TURA Certain PFAS NOL category. A couple of them only have one perfluorinated carbon, so they're too short of a chain to be included. PVDF is an example of a polymer that is not included. It doesn't meet the definition. And then at the bottom here, we have a couple other examples of PFAS that do not meet the definition. The one on the left is not contiguous. So if the three perfluorinated carbons aren't contiguous in a row, then it does not meet the definition. So that was the easy part. And this is the part that gets harder. So what do you do if a CAS number is not provided? Remember that we said that a third of what's on the TSCA CDR for PFAS are PFAS that don't have a CAS number or a chemical name. So those are where things get really hard. So first off, you should check your SDS, and we're going to go through several examples today. Keywords you should be looking out for: fluor, PFXX, fluorinated, fluoro, anything that is showing in the degradation area of your SDS as fluorinated. You should be suspicious about all that stuff. Sometimes the technical data sheets actually have more information about the PFAS that are in the product rather than the SDS. So the technical data sheet is always a resource that could be helpful. And then if you strike out there, it's time to contact your supplier. And you can also contact OTA or TURI, and we will walk through it with you the best that we can and try to help figure it out. So OTA has developed this supplier notification letter, a template letter to send to your supplier, both to, they developed one to help companies comply with the TRI PFAS, and another one to help companies comply with a certain PFAS NOL category. So that's available on OTA's website, and a link here in the presentation for you to use and kind of plug and chug with that. So the next part of the presentation, we're going to be going through the uses that we most expect in Massachusetts, and some sample SDSs of products in those uses that have PFAS. So fluoropolymer, so the first use in Massachusetts is plastics and resins, and fluoropolymer resins are used to manufacture products where heat, low coefficient of friction, or chemical resistance are needed, resistance to heat. Uses in Massachusetts include insulation and jacketing of wire and cable, and we expect several filers in this industry sector to trip thresholds in Massachusetts. And here we've got a sample SDS from a product used in that type of use. And they've made it easy on us this time. In section 3, they're listing perfluoroalkoxyalkane with a CAS number, which is so nice. We can go to table 4, we can find that CAS number there. And this one was a pretty easy identification. And just to note, many of these have chemical structures on the left. Some of us like to do this by chemical structure. Some like to do it by CAS number. I'm like all CAS numbers all the time. Liz usually goes and grabs a chemical structure to look, so she's added in those chemical structures here on the left for us. The next use in Massachusetts is coatings, and fluoropolymer coatings reduce friction on the surface of medical devices and can provide autoclave resistant finishes. So cookware would also be included in this use category. We don't think we have anyone making cookware in Massachusetts, but we do definitely have companies that make medical devices, including the ones listed here. So we think there might be some filers in this sector. Here's an example product used in that sort of industry. which is a PTFE dispersion. PTFE is definitely included. They've given us this nice CAS number again, which I'm always so thankful for. We can find it in table 4. So this is pretty straightforward. It's listing as up to 55% by weight. We know if there's no bottom bound on that, we have to use the upper bound. So we would use that 55% to calculate whether we meet the threshold and to report. So this one was pretty easy as well. The only thing I'll note about this SDS is that it's pretty old. It's from 2010. And one of the best practices that we're recommending for you today is have the most up-to-date SDS possible. Ideally, it's been updated this year. It definitely should be after 2015 for PFAS, but in this case, this one did the job. Here we've got another SDS for PTFE, and these guys weren't quite as nice to us. So they've got the components listed here, but they don't include PFAS. But we can see, for starters, we can see it's PTFE, and we just learned that PTFE is included. And then also with the chemical nature, we have fluoropolymer dispersions. So we should be really suspicious at this point about the fluoropolymer dispersion. And if we didn't already know that PTFE was included, we would be reaching out to our supplier on that. But we know this is called PTFE dispersion. So we know it's PFAS and that it would be included. The next expected use in Massachusetts is metal finishing. So PFAS is used as a fume suppressant in chrome plating. It can also be used in electroless nickel or copper for lubricity. This is a really important sector in terms of exposure and potential releases to the environment. But overall, quantities may be below threshold for filers in this industry sector. We do really want filers to be aware of their PFAS usage. We know that some POTWs are out there working back up their chain for industrial users, and it's really best to really try to figure out if there's PFAS usage at your facility before you have some sort of liability issue. So, they may not meet reporting thresholds and have to file, but it's still a really important usage. We have a couple SDSs that are examples here. Caswell chrome fume suppressant. So here under ingredients, they have given us this very lengthy name that has lots of fluoro in it. We can look up that CAS number on table 4. We will find it there and know that that has to be reported. Here's a 3M acid mist suppressant. Here, more general. So we've got a fluoroalkyl acrylate adduct. We're suspicious because it says fluoroalkyl, but we don't have any better information. So here we should contact the supplier and ask them whether this meets the definition of the TURA category. And you can use the OTA supplier letter to do that. In general, the fluoroalkyl acrylate adducts are included. We don't know specifically which one this is, but it's a safe assumption that this would be included in the category. Because they're saying 48 to 52% by weight, we can take the mid-range, we can use 50% there. What else did I want to say? Anyway, so we should know that that is likely included. The next expected use in Massachusetts is textiles. So typical applications are stain and water repellency, sometimes in military or firefighting gear, sometimes in personal use outerwear, footwear, high performance items. And we know that there are some facilities using PFAS in Massachusetts for this purpose. And one of the questions that we received is, what is the program doing with all this information that we're receiving? And we are trying to connect people that we know are using PFAS with alternatives, connect alternatives research, and the Nantucket PFAS Action Group is one example of a community grant that is working with Nantucket to remove, to get new fire equipment that does not have PFAS in it. And study the effects on the firefighters. So here's an example, SDS. We've got the Dakin Textile Durable Water Repellent. Again, there's a fluoroalkyl acrylate copolymer. So we don't know specifically which PFAS this is, but it's pretty likely to meet our definition. So this is a situation where you would have to reach out to the supplier again to get more information. Another expected use in Massachusetts is paper. PFAS is used in paper facilities for coating. It's also used for grease resistance, for food packaging. I'm sure we all use food packaging that has sometimes PFAS coatings. And it can also be used for coatings in performance papers. And we know that there are facilities in Massachusetts that use PFAS for that reason. So here's an example of the Dakin paper grease. Again, another fluoroalkyl acrylate copolymer. Again, we would have to reach out to the supplier and find out whether it meets the definition of the category, but it's very likely that it does, and we should assume that it does until we have better information available. Next expected use of Massachusetts is electronic components. Etching solutions is used in etching solutions as surfactants. And there's likely many users in Massachusetts, but they're also likely under threshold. But again, we really encourage people at this point in time to do the digging and see whether there's any PFAS used in your facility, so you can start looking for alternatives and reduce future potential liabilities. And this is another area where we've connected a company, Transcene, with the Department of Plastics Engineering with a grant to come up with a non-PFAS surfactant. And that project has been really successful, and you can learn more about it at the spring TUR conference on April 12th. Next use in Massachusetts, surface cleaning. Hydrofluoroethers, HFEs, are definitely included in the PFAS NOL definition. Popular products are HFE 7100 and HFE 7500. There are others, and we'll look at a couple SDSs now. Oftentimes, these HFEs are paired with trans-dichloroethylene, also not a great choice for cleaning. I think, although it's a choice that cleans well, it's not like a great environmental health and safety choice. So sometimes if you see trans DCE, you will see the HFEs as well. So here we have two fluorinated products. They've got CAS numbers, which is great. We can look those up. They're in table 4. So we know that those are reportable. Here, they've not been as nice. There's a proprietary fluorinated blend. We should definitely be suspicious by the fact that they say it's fluorinated, and we'll have to follow up with the supplier to see if it meets the definition. Here for the 3M Novix 72DA, on the left, we have an SDS, and on the right, we have a technical data sheet. So again, sometimes you're finding a little bit different or more information on the technical data sheet. But on the left, circled in red, 4 out of 5 of these components are PFAS. We can look up these CAS numbers. They are in table 4. Because this is a category, we would add them all together to do our threshold determination and potentially reporting. And again, those were paired with trans DCE as well. Another expected use in Massachusetts is petroleum products. So we know there are companies that manufacture lubricants. There may be some filers in the sector. Here's an example of one of those products. This is PFPE. Under section 3 of the SDS, there's no hazardous components, so we can't tell what's in here. PFPE is definitely included in the TURA definition. This is a little bit hard to find because there's a lot of different variations of PFPE. It's not on the list as PFPE. You saw the tables, the names are all super long. So we were able to Google for a CAS number and find that CAS number on table 4. However, this one was like a little less straightforward, but PFPE is included on the list if you come across it. And the supplier should have been able to tell you that. All right, this is the last use in Massachusetts. We're going to cover AFFF. And AFFF, you know, you can't talk about PFAS without talking about AFFF, even if it's not the most relevant to TURA. So municipal and government uses of AFFF are not covered under TURA, like any other chemical. But if you're using it industrially, if you're processing it or putting it into a product, then it would be covered. And we do have one company in Massachusetts that we know does that. On the alternative side, TURA has also worked with the Department of Defense on an AFFF alternatives assessment project. So, so that's a little bit of work that's been done there by the program to look for alternatives. I have a couple of slides here talking about the work that OTA is doing. So DEP and EPA have identified wastewater treatment facilities that are upstream from high priority drinking water protection areas. And OTA is providing free confidential technical assistance as they do to industries upstream. So these drinking water protection areas and the wastewater treatment facilities are really focusing on what PFAS is coming in and where it's coming from. So OTA is helping the companies that are upstream, identifying PFAS and products, helping the companies communicate with their suppliers, their typical P2 and TUR help, and also with issues related to climate change and resource conservation. So that's a resource that's out there, particularly focused on those high priority drinking water protection areas, but OTA services that are also, you know, free and confidential and available to everyone. OTA has also developed surveys for metal finishing and paper industries, and they're working on ones for coatings and textiles. And this helps OTA technical staff flag likely sources of PFAS at a company. And OTA staff can, you know, help companies figure out if there might be PFAS used in the facility. As always, they'll pursue research on products of concern. And if companies want to share with us products that they're finding contain PFAS after they've reached out to suppliers, the program is keeping a list of those. The more that we all learn, we know this information is not that easy to tease out. The more we all learn and share, the more we can kind of help each other. So this is a portion of that product list of products that we know contain PFAS in the category that they're in. A few other good resources for uses, particularly if you're in the coatings, paints, and furnaces sector. There's an OECD document about PFAS and alternatives that is linked here. GLUJ 2020 is really like the most cited literature that talks about really where PFAS are being used over a variety of industries, a longer list of industries. So that is linked here for you. EPA has a multi-industry PFAS study, and that covers metal finishing, paper, textiles, and airports. So those were areas that EPA was really worried about. So there's some information in that multi-industry study there that might be helpful to people in those industries. And again, with metal finishing, Minnesota has a metal finishing document that may be helpful. So if you're in any one of those industries, or if you're just looking for something more general, the GLUJ paper is good to further kind of work through whether PFAS might be used at your facility. So, so just added the Teflon example here as an example of how complicated this all can be. Sometime early on, maybe a year or two ago, somebody asked me at a training whether Teflon was included. And here's the answer. PTFE is included in the proposed PFAS NOL category. If you have PTFE pellets that are being processed, such as an extrusion or encoding emulsions, those you would have to report. If you have articles, typical article exemptions apply. So if you've got Teflon tape or spacers, you would likely be able to make the article exemption for that. And then TFE, the monomer that's used in the manufacture of PTFE, is not included in the proposed PFAS NOL category. However, it was already individually listed under TURA. So just a lot of complexities with these sorts of materials, and wanted to use this as an example to talk through. Okay, this next slide, I'm going to hand over to DEP for.
Veronica, you're on mute.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I'm Veronica O'Donnell, the branch chief at MassDEP for the TURA program. These next couple slides, there's not many of them. They can be a little dense, so bear with me. And if you have questions, it's more we're there so that we can help you know how to file and what things we would be looking for. So the first reporting year, you definitely should be evaluating the chemicals used at the facility. And as we spoke, and as Heather showed, OTA has some mocked up letters. You send inquiry letters to your manufacturers requesting information on PFAS content if you suspect that they have PFAS in their products. We're asking that you keep records of the letters sent and the responses received, because this shows us that due diligence was conducted, and follow up with the manufacturer if you don't hear back from them, and keep records of the follow-ups, so that if in fact you can't get some of these answers and DEP wants to see what you did to like I said, do your due diligence for this process, you'll be able to show that to us. Next slide, Heather, or whomever.
Do you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Just checking.
Okay. So it's the green, you know. The big thing we want to touch on and tell everyone is to file on time. Even if you haven't received the manufacturer's information and you're still awaiting a response, please file. We were asking that you alert us via email, and that is the program email box, if you're still awaiting a manufacturer's response. So you file, and you're not completely sure that you have all your PFAS, you send us an email at tura.programs@mass.gov and say that you are still awaiting certain information, but you have filed. When you file, you should include an estimate of your PFAS usage and add a comment in the Form S Section 5 data field stating that you have estimated your PFAS usage. As Heather's been touching on through this whole presentation, if a chemical contains fluorine, assume its PFAS category until better information is available. If you are including an estimate of your PFAS usage so that you can file on time, we also ask that you email the program, same email address, and describe how you estimated your PFAS in your Form S. And in the line of that email, please say PFAS estimated. We anticipate we'll get quite a few of these emails, and we'd like to be able to sort them and answer them appropriately. When you receive the PFAS information from the manufacturer, you can submit an amended summary report via eDEP. We have that feature for you now. You will be billed for any additional compounds when the filing is amended, but you only have one fee for your if things cross categories. Okay, next slide. If you this is what I was just trying to address. If your facility reports a chemical that's included in both the 1047 halogenated compounds and the 1300 certain PFAS NOL categories, you have to report both categories. Refer to the TURA reporting appendices, page 101 and 105. That's the link to them. It'll help describe this. In the Form 5, Section F, Section 5 data field, state the reported chemicals by name, which fall into both categories. And once again, send an email to us, alerting us of these entries. If you put both categories in the subject line of the email, you can take a look, and chemicals reported in both categories will only be billed one fee. So I know this is a lot. You should have access to these slides that kind of give you the emails that we'd like to receive to help make sure the billing goes as planned and make sure that your filing comes in on time, even if you have to estimate PFAS use and then file an amended report. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. So we just have two last slides here, and then we'll go to questions. So best practices, again, get a new SDS yearly if possible, and definitely post 2015 for anything PFAS suspecting. Make sure you're keeping those copies of your SDSs and your supplier correspondence. That's how DEP will know that you made an effort to figure this out. You made your best effort to figure this out. We are recommending that you reach out on all products as a first pass because there are PFAS that are used in areas that are not highlighted here today. It's really best to try to do a pretty thorough job on all your products as a first pass this year. And then we recommend that you train purchasing staff to question any fluorinated products that are brought into the facility. And that's one way to kind of turn off the tap and make sure that you're not bringing fluorinated products in the facility. If something is slippery, anti-stick, anti-stain, water repellent, stain repellent, or fluorinated in any way, you should be suspicious. If HF or any fluorinated product is listed as a breakdown product on your SDS, you should be suspicious. Those are red flags and things that really require a thorough follow-up on. We also did want to mention that if you are using PFAS under reporting thresholds, you can still do TUR planning on PFAS as one of your alternative planning options under your resource conservation plan. So that is an option if you find out that you're using PFAS under reporting thresholds. And then this is the last slide. Why a preventative approach? These are water supplies that are contaminated in Massachusetts. A lot of this is from AFFF. Some of it is from facilities that had no idea that they were causing a contamination problem in their community, and no facility wants that. So we know that this is a really heavy lift for you guys right now. We know this is really challenging space, but it's really worth the time to try to chase it down now and avoid future problems. So that is all our slides for today. Thanks everyone for submitting questions in advance. We did try to hit upon those as we went through today, but now we've got a good bit of time to answer any questions that we didn't answer thoroughly enough or any new questions that come in.
Thanks, Heather. So we do have some questions in the chat that I want to share with you. And while we're doing that, if you in the audience have any other questions, please get ready to ask that. So let's see, has OTA or TURA gone through the exercise of requesting updated safety data sheets from suppliers? We have had mixed results from chemical suppliers, especially those located outside of Massachusetts. So Tiffany or Heather, can you?
OTA has not yet.
Okay. Is that something that you are thinking about doing?
I mean, now I am. No. Yeah,
Good.
so it's not a bad idea. So thanks for bringing it up.
Great. All right. I have a
Pam,
yeah.
just one other thought. The reason that we're suggesting that they go for newer safety data sheets is companies are increasingly including information about PFAS on them, and that's a good thing. But just because you don't have a newer safety data sheet, you should still be doing the same due diligence of contacting your supplier to try to find out what's in any product that you have in your facility, regardless of whether it's got PFAS.
Great. Thanks. Do I have to report PFAS contained in fire suppression foam if I have a system that has fire suppression? And I think you've covered it, Heather, but I want you to reiterate.
So that answer is no, correct, TURA program staff?
And the reason is?
because it's used as maintenance of your facility and
Mhm.
not something you're putting in product or, you know, in your manufacturing process.
Right, so it's a type of use that isn't covered under TURA. It could certainly be something that you could address in your alternative planning opportunities under the resource conservation, but not something that you have to report on ultimately. Here's another question. If my supplier says a fluoro raw material does not contain PFAS and supplies a letter stating their material does not contain PFAS, is my company covered?
That's an excellent question. So your letter, the letter is great. If they have replied that you do not have a PFAS meeting that TURA definition, I should refer to DEP, but I would say that should cover you.
And I think the critical thing that you said there is meeting the TURA definition. Right? So just saying we don't have PFAS in general, maybe you want to ask them to take a look at the definition and confirm that what's in their product doesn't meet this definition.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to be careful of people saying like PFOS free or PFOA free. And that's why I, in particular, would defer to make sure that the letter says that it doesn't meet, there's no PFAS meeting that TURA definition. And I'll let DEP comment on their take on that. But the other thing I just would want to emphasize is I'm still super suspicious. I would want to be very careful about how that material is used in my facility and how, you know, how it's discharged in the air or the water. Because even if it doesn't meet the PFAS definition, if it's fluorinated, it definitely has the potential to cause some environmental problems that could be significant.
Veronica, anything to add to that?
No, I agree with what Heather is saying. If it's used in something like that, you're not using it in your process or in your facilities, and they would have to look at the TURA definition.
Okay, thanks. So we have a question from Brian. Is there an approved methodology for testing the presence of PFAS in wastewater or surface water? One of their NIPD's permits requires them to test for PFAS in their wastewater discharge, even though their material vendor has certified that there are no PFAS used or added to the material we process. Our testing lab, who is on the DEP list of approved labs, is asking me what methodology to use.
I think that's a question we're gonna have to circle back about. I know I can't speak that well on water testing. I don't know if anybody else here can.
No.
Heather, I'd just like to jump in for a second.
Sure.
I guess I could say I can give a partial answer to the question. Right now, there is no EPA approved test method to use for, you know, evaluating, you know, PFAS in either wastewater or I forget what the second
Surface water.
Surface water. Right. The only EPA approved method right now is just for drinking water. I mean, they are working on a method for other matrices, but it has not been finally approved. The other thing I guess I would suggest to the company is, you say that this is a requirement, you know, for a NIPD's permit. I would look at the permit where EPA is describing this requirement and see if they are requiring the specific method to use. You know, if it's not in the permit itself, I would suggest going back to EPA and asking them what you know, what method should be used. There are some modified versions of the drinking water method, you know, that some labs are using, but I think you should get, you should get guidance from EPA on, exactly what they would want you to use.
Yeah, and I just dropped the MassDEP's permit page from EPA into the chat, and it has actual contact there.
Oh, good.
Cool.
And Beth also added that the EPA method for drinking water is method 533. But I think the best advice is to just reach out to EPA and confirm.
Actually, the drinking water method is 537.
Okay, well, let's not debate method numbers, because I want to make sure that we get to other questions. Have something here. Quite a few of our customers use PTFE in their extrusion lines. They're in different states, though. Are the regulations the same for all the states?
So no, TRI regulations are the same for all the states, but the TURA regulations that we've mostly been focused on here today is Massachusetts specific.
Right. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. If anybody else has a question they would like to ask, why don't you could probably stop sharing your slides so that we can see everybody.
Good, thanks.
Yeah, and we do have a question that just came in. Currently, TURA PFAS chemicals are not used in the manufacture. Does this statement, so that's a quote, I assume that they probably got from a manufacturer. Does this statement cover my facility? Currently, TURA PFAS chemicals are not used in the manufacture of the product that they're purchasing. I'm assuming, Antonio, is that right? So does that cover them? Does that cover his facility, that he has got that documentation?
Does
DEP.
DEP, you want to take a stab at that?
I just want to clarify one thing. It probably depends on what your product or formulation was that you were asking about. So if you're asking about a formulated product like a plating bath, and they say this answer, then you can say there are no listed PFAS in my product. I'm all set. If you're talking about like something that you're a coating that you're then polymerizing or something, and they're talking about the monomer, then that may not be the case. Does that sound right, guys?
Antonia, I know we've talked in the past, so maybe we could just do a quick follow-up after this. Because I was under the impression the product you were using would probably be covered. But I want to say that if somebody tells you it's not in the product, you're good.
But DEP would say that that's good faith. That's a good faith effort to do your due diligence. Is that right, Veronica?
I mean, yeah, we would need to say what you have received from your manufacturers and what they're saying about it.
Yeah, I think simply just receiving a statement saying currently TURA PFAS chemicals are not used in the manufacture at our facility is not sufficient.
So even if they received that letter from the manufacturer of the product they're using, you'd say that's not enough.
Okay, from the vendor, yeah, maybe. Okay, that might be. I was thinking if they submitted it directly to us.
If they made that statement about their own manufacturing process, that would not be.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
But
good.
it's the manufacturer. If you ask for the SCF sheet or you ask for information on PFAS and they send you something like this that they signed, that would be showing that you have asked the manufacturer and you received information.
Okay. Here we go. Is there a suggested method for testing whether a raw material contains PFAS if a supplier does not respond to a PFAS inquiry?
So I don't have a suggestion for that. I do know that some facilities are, we've definitely heard from some facilities that are testing that they've got PFAS in their wastewater, even though they can't find where the PFAS is being used in the facility. So I know some facilities are doing like a waste, wastewater treatment, wastewater tests to, to kind of as a hunting expedition. But I don't have like a better suggestion than that. Does anybody else?
And that reminds me, we had a question previously that said something about what do they do if they discover that there's PFAS in the water there that's coming onto their facility, into their processed water? Remember that question? Any response?
Well, did anybody have anything to add to the first question, which is there a test? What if the supplier doesn't respond? Do we have any testing suggestions? I mean, if I owned a facility, I would probably test the water going out as part of my hunting expedition, but that stinks. I mean, it really stinks if the supplier is just not providing that information as they should and as they say they do every time they come and argue about a chemical being listed.
So it sounds like maybe as a program, we could provide some additional information on testing methods. It sounds like OTA has some good information, and maybe we could put some stuff together for you all. But you know that you're not required to do that kind of testing under TURA or TRI, right? You're
Absolutely
required to
not
use-
required. It's just part of your optional hunting expedition if you can't get good information.
Right.
As far as the incoming water from the city or the town, I believe the EPA has guidance regarding lead in incoming makeup water. So I think we'd have to take a look at that and see if we can make that work for this as well. But I don't recall what the policy is.
And at this point, all the, both for the TURA category and for the EPA 100-pound individually listed, they're all subject to de minimis. So PFOA, the de minimis is 0.1%, everything else it's 1% or greater. So in general, you're not going to have your water coming in greater than any of those percentages. EPA has talked about getting rid of the de minimis by designating all the PFAS as chemicals of particular concern. And so if they do that, then that may be, like Walter said, then it becomes more like a PBT chemical where you need to worry about that kind of thing. But at this point.
Thanks, Liz. I forgot to mention the de minimis. It's in the guidance document though. Check it out.
Right. So I posted the link to the document. We will post the recording of this webinar at the same location on our website once I get it. There is also on April 12th, we're doing a conference in Marlborough. There's going to be a session where we're going to hear from Transcene, a company that had been manufacturing PFAS-based etching solutions for the electronics industry, and they have done the research and replaced their product and worked with their customers to adopt a new product line. So a really interesting example of how you can address PFAS in your operation, and also interesting how they were able to get their customers to accept that change, because as we know, sometimes customers can be one of the biggest barriers to change. So if you haven't done so already, think about joining us in Marlborough on April 12th. We also have there are past webinar slides that that the program has provided. There's a spring of last year, John Rashko did a great deeper dive into the chemistry of PFAS. So we know this is a super complicated and confusing issue. And so we really appreciate you sticking with it and asking the questions. Walter, this kind of a presentation will be part of the reporting webinars in May. Is that true? That's true. Yes. Okay. Thanks. So lots more opportunities to get your questions answered, but certainly anybody at the TURA program will be happy to help you find your answers if possible. Any last things that you want to say, Heather or Veronica or anyone else? Any last questions before we let you go? We've got a couple minutes, so I certainly don't want to cut off the questions if you have any. You can feel free to raise your hand if you'd rather, or just unmute yourself.
Definitely feel free though to reach out if you're, if you have a material you're questioning, or if, you get something back from your supplier that doesn't make sense, or if your supplier is not responding to you, just definitely feel free to reach out and we can do a little more troubleshooting with you and try to get the best information that we can.
Yeah. And OTA provides confidential technical assistance. They won't tell anybody you have asked if you call them.
That's right. And I'm dropping another link in the chat for some of our resources.
Thanks. And there, Beth asked really quickly, is there a date in May for the reporting webinars, Walter? Not yet. I'm
No,
like
not
reading your
yet,
lips.
Not yet. You are reading them very
Got
well. We're working on that in a couple of days, actually.
Excellent, excellent. All right, good. And Tiffany has posted some resources from OTA on PFAS. Great, thank you. All right, well, definitely find the slides, and if you are looking to get credit as a TUR planner for attending this webinar, you can reply to and submit the questionnaire that will be coming to you shortly. If you're not interested in the credit, that's fine. But if you don't submit that survey, you won't get that credit. So thank you, Heather, for putting this together. Thank you to the entire TURA program for really collaborating to gather good information and responses to this very complicated situation. And we will continue to be here for the rest of you. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much.